Assalamualaikum and good morning everyone. So this is the last chapter in this course, which is on ethical issues in biotechnology. So I guess this week would be more or less kind of like the last week's lecture. Uh, so for like I told you guys last week, the first hour, I'll just let you watch this video even though it won't take you half an hour, I think, about half an hour the most. Then at 12, okay, we'll continue with discussion on any ethical issues in biotech. And on Tuesday, we are going to do some evaluation assessment of your video that you made. How are we going to do that? Okay, on Tuesday, and I will brief you again on in the next hour anyway. So let's move on. Now, these issues are basically raised, or whatever that is in your notes are some of the issues that is raised, but there would be more. That's why we need to discuss it later on. So don't take it to heart saying that only those highlighted here are the important ones. There are also others, but I didn't have time to include all of it in here. So all these issues usually rise from the development and application of course, we know, biotech and lots of other updating and also more or less integration and whatnot. So when we have new knowledge, okay, regardless of what field it is and techniques, so it would sometimes create some things or make things which are impossible before. Like previously, who would have known that you could clone a gene or clone an animal? The thought would be kind of like, what, out of the world. But nowadays we know that it's possible, it's not so uncommon, and it's going to be kind of like normal. So some of these are beneficial, but some of these do cause concern, and some of them do have serious implication and sometimes could cause public opposition, which means that the public doesn't really support the idea. And there are also ongoing debate on certain ethics and biotech application and also methods. So the ethical values for each of the issues raised indicate what is right and or wrong. So again, what people believe is right and what other people believe is wrong is basically their own opinion. There is no right, there is no wrong. It's actually up to their opinion and perception. So there is a choice from the benefit to disadvantages. So sometimes certain benefits people see it as disadvantages and vice versa. So judgments are sometimes also based on religious and social attitudes. So religious is something that is close to heart, and it is actually quite serious topic, especially when it involves some of the cloning materials and techniques. There are also ethical dilemmas in biotech, and the implication basically because it has certain impact on certain people. That's why I just put it here. It varies between individuals and cultures, and not forgetting the religious. And apart from that, when we discuss some of these issues, or when you see some of the issues, you need to make a distinction between ethics, morals, and value, and you need to be able to basically differentiate each and every one of them, and do not combine them all in one. They actually mean separate things. So moral values depend on balance between the perceived good and bad aspects of decision. Ethics usually involve kind of like work ethics or race, and so forth. So when we talk about ethics, actually much more severe consequences as compared to moral. Moral is more kind of like your nurture, how you are nurtured, and the perception. Now, for certain difficult decisions, such as previously it was embryo cloning, a line usually needs to be drawn as a measure to quantify the extent of applicability of a certain technique or knowledge. So this is basically from fears and discomfort, especially when discovery exceeds comprehension. So when Dolly was made in 1997, and it was like, wow, something which is very big, a lot of people actually are opposed to the idea, and they are saying that scientists are playing God. But I wouldn't say that I'm basically supporting it, but some of it yes, some of it is not, because there are also goods in those bad things. So these ethical issues sometimes concern the potential moral outcomes of a certain application or technology. So to the animal cruelty people, they thought that it is inhumane. So those kind of things involve ethics, and the ethical concerns usually arise from, for example, I'm just giving some of the topics, chapters that we have covered in human embryo cloning. The ethical aspects involved are, and not only restricted to this, acceptability of reprogramming human embryo to develop into certain cell types, acceptability of reproductive human cloning. You cannot basically expect people to accept all of this. Okay, so they may accept, they may not accept, they may have their own ideas. So that's where the ethical aspects would come into view. The next one is the permissibility of a creation of cloned human embryo for medical. So who do we get the permission from? Acceptability of a transfer of human cells into animals for the animals to produce certain human cells. So this is actually very debatable up until now, and especially to the Animal Cruelty Society. And the last one I put here is actually the acceptability of the risks involved in cell replacement therapy. And in this itself, okay, there are also other ethical aspects such as, okay, and also concerns, particular gender zygote elimination without abortion. And what they are concerned is the male. So production of human with a desirable trait and production of these human clones. It could also lead to a decrease in genetic diversity of a certain trait or eliminate it. For example, if you keep cloning yourself, then only you are available, right? Okay, or there are many of you, but not much diversity. So certain trait probably could be eliminated. And during the production itself, potential killing or injuring or exploitation of embryos. And we know from transgenic animal that that happens actually a lot. So the last one is actually, since human clones, this is related to human, do not always require the fusion of egg and sperm, sperms might not be needed. Hence, we go back again to this and this concern. Alright, so the current cloning technology is also in question because as the technology improves, it gets even weirder, and sometimes, especially for example CRISPR, we know that it's actually a very simple method, but okay, to what extent could it be used or could it be misused? Okay, so the next one is the, even if cloning a human is a success, what about the consequences that lay ahead? What will happen to the human? Who is the parent? And what will the child go through as it grows up? The next one is interference of a family structure of identities and lineage. So for example, if you clone yourself, your clone, is it you or your child? The next one, the ambiguities of inheritance. Well, if you have lots of inheritance, then probably there would be some issue over here. So the next issue, this is always from the beginning up until now. Clones, is it a product or is it considered as a life, or is it something that is just a tool for science? And the next one is the change in eugenic movement. So we know eugenic is actually the study, okay, on traits and whatnot, but will it change when you produce clones, when you play around with certain traits? Right. Apart from that, okay, there are also concerns that cloning may destroy individuality because your clone may be similar to you in feature and outlook and of course DNA, but okay, it's actually nurture they are bringing that basically will affect the personality. The next is sexing children affects a nation. For example, this is what happens in China before because they don't really prefer female. So usually when couples have female, they either kill it or bury it because this is from a story I heard. But nowadays it's quite okay. But sexing children would affect a nation because when you have lots of males, how are you going to reproduce, right? By nature, it couldn't happen, but of course, with cloning is possible. The next one is a right to life. Okay, so this is actually a very sensitive kind of like concern and always debatable, and there is no right, there is no wrong to the opinions. The next one is the right to having children, conceived or cloned. Yeah, I'll leave it up to you to imagine. The real parent of a clone. Okay, again, okay, when I was asking okay, about okay, when you have a clone, okay, is your clone your child or you yourself? And the challenges of a clone child, including of growing up without a real parent. And human cloning, okay, always debatable, and of course, issues still up until now. Is it playing God? Are you trying to basically go against nature and whatnot? Alright, In terms of therapeutic cloning, so there are questions of harvesting embryos for these therapeutic purposes. So we know that pre-embryos usually does not even reach embryo stage, which means that no life has been created yet. But you are taking it and using it to create something else. So from a leaf, which stage the ovum becomes a human, basically I have been determined, and from one religion to another is actually different. But in terms of science, it has been known. The next one, okay, is actually the legality of the process. Certain countries actually consider it as illegal. If you were to take the pre-embryo stage to produce the blastocyst for therapeutic cloning or human cloning or whatever, it's actually illegal. Next is different view in outlining legislation that, of course, occurs in certain countries as well. European countries have this before, but when they come out with the European Committee (EU), so they have more or less come with a compromise. And of course, okay, there is always different opposition to reproductive cloning and therapeutic cloning. Again, like I said, okay, somebody says it as a benefit, but the benefits, okay, is something that is of a disadvantage, okay, to another person. So, in terms of stem cell therapy, so these are some of the concerns, not only from the scientists, but also the public and the opposition. The source of these stem cells, where do you get it from? Is it, for example, if it's related to religion, for example, Islam, is it halal? And where did you get it, and how did you get it? The next one is pre-embryo produced will actually be a human if it's going to be involved in human cloning. So is it going to can be considered as a murder? Are you murdering a life before it is being formed? The next one is immoral to kill a person in order to save another's life. Some people think that, but for those who are saving another people's life, they have a different perception. So this is where I say that there is no right, there is no wrong to the opinion. The next one is the extent of the research. You have to know this, that sometimes certain scientists, well, even me sometimes, we are willing to go to the extent for our research just to see whether our theories is correct, our hypothesis, okay, how far we will go and whatnot. So this is sometimes the worry of a lot of other scientists and also government. The next one is funding. Where did you get the funding from? Is it from government, public, or private, or if you have your own money? Next, laws to regulate the research. So far, there is not much law of regulation of this human cloning and stem cell therapy or gene therapy. Laws is being outlined, but there is no one law that is applicable to all countries in the world. The next, the question of life from embryonic stem cells. Safety concerns always. Guarantee of therapy always debatable and questionable. And again, this would vary from one person to another as well. The next one is improper gene regulation. So this could also happen, especially in gene therapy, hence making people wary or and question whether the therapy will work or not. There is also the high risk involved if a spread of viruses infect humans if you use a virus vector and if not handled properly, or if the virus mutates, such as what is happening with the coronavirus. And the last one is the man-made genes, okay, are even actually more dangerous because we know that there are lots of synthetic genes nowadays. So some of them, well, the function and how it is expressed or regulated is actually not fully known. So that could be dangerous in long term. So, moving on to the lesser heavy topics, right? So genetically modified products or organism, GMP or GMO. Now we know that, okay, we discussed this a lot, especially in chapter 2 on product from biotech and also transgenic animal and transgenic plant. So application of GE, of course, is the main technique being used, and of course we know that it could be applied to a wide range of organisms. So changes we know could be made easily, quickly, and directly, especially with the, well, the hoo-ha about CRISPR nowadays. So plants and animals' natural breeding probably could be changed through evolution, but with GE you could actually just change it in a matter of at your hands. Again, probably decreasing the evolution time. The next is the interference with nature that could affect the food chain. So this is what a lot of you actually answer in the test, which is actually correct. So food chain, or basically the environment, okay, could be changed, because we know that food chain is something that is crucial, okay, for the environment. So if we change the food chain, so probably, okay, the ecosystem will suffer. The next one is modified species. Is it different from the normal ones? And how different is it? And to what extent is it going to be different? The next one, breeding of modified organisms. Is it safe? This is always a question on the safety. So the next one is GMO or GMP, a solution or a problem? So some people see it as a solution if they manage to basically solve a problem, but some people may see it as another problem from the solution. So from the GMOs, it may not benefit the poor, because we know that the cost will going to increase. It's not going to be easy, and it's not cheap to apply GE actually. And the last one I put here is the IP issues. Remember from last week, and from your PBLs that you did on Tuesday. So there are lots of IP issues regarding GMO and GMP. Now, let's take a look at some of the examples of GMO and GMP in terms of food, which is closest to us. Okay, don't think of food yet. Okay, this is still fasting month, some of you. So, long-term effect of growing and eating GM food. This is always an issue, because even though they say that it's safe and whatnot, but long term, and from one people to another, from one race to another, from one region or continent to another, the effect's going to be different. The next one is lack of product labeling. So this is always questionable, because there is no law that says that GM product needs to be labeled, even in Malaysia. The third one is it would affect the environment and the food chain, and of course would change the ecosystem. It may also decline uh, certain species, because when you change some of the makeup, or when you produce only those kind of clones, then probably certain species would probably maybe endangered, or kind of like just vanish later on. The next one is the effect of foreign substances to the ecosystem and food chain. The next is concerns of new strain of bacteria, whether it's going to be good or will it mutate to be even worse than the wild type. The next one is the cost of studying the effect of a product, which is going to be expensive. And of course, GM food and the poor. We know that the poor usually doesn't benefit from it, because even though GM food has been touted to has this nutrition and whatnot, but the price is expensive, and the poor won't be able to afford the food. In terms of safety, these are some of the concerns. Potential risks, uh, in terms of what kind of risk, there is always a lot of it, depending from one person to another. Killing of harmless insects, because when you want to kill certain pests, you will also kill the good ones that is good for the production of a certain crops, for example. Increase resistance in pests. Okay, so this is what happens, okay, with BT that they have seen previously. Now it's actually quite powerful, but previously, the first few years when they introduced the BT genes, it actually increased the resistance in the past. The next one is label, of course, and storage and shipping. How do they store it? And when they ship, what do they do to preserve it? So the next one is on the animals and transgenic animals. So killing of animals to save a human life for xenotransplantation. For the Animal Cruelty Society, that is definitely something that shouldn't be done. But in terms of saving a life, sometimes, well, a doctor have to do what they have to do. So the next one is fear of contracting diseases, like from the animals. Sorry, typo there, from. So, well, we now know, especially from the coronavirus and the COVID-19 scare, that certain diseases from the animals could be transferred to human, and also certain diseases from human could be transferred to animals. So, the next one is cloning, endangered, and of course, this something could cause extinction of certain animal species. So, apart from that, there are also the cost of successful production. You may claim that it is successful, but how long does it take for it to be successful, and the total cost involved. The next one is endangering the life of the animal itself while cloning, and the habitat. So if you remember back when we were in the beginning of transgenic animal, I showed you the timeline and some of the animals that has been cloned. Among them is woolly mammoth. So it is actually one of an extinct animal. If we were to have woolly mammoth now, and we know that it is going to be very big, what will happen? Where would it live? Could it just live in the zoo? it needs its own natural habitat, but because we don't really have that much forest now, so probably it's not good for the animal. Right, so the last one is engineered animals as models of human disease. So of course this is always debatable, especially to the animal cruelty society, in terms of suffering and torture. And this is also some of a sensitive issue sometimes. So whenever it is being discussed, usually people thread it carefully. So the next one is on farming. Okay, again the P, farming. So it may shrink livestock genetic variability for certain species. So donor organs for xenotransplantation are not always safe. Again, sometimes the certain disease may be transmitted, or sometimes it might not work properly, or sometimes they may be rejection. There are lots of complications there. Implications of unsuccessful animals. What will happen to it? Would you just keep it, or would you just discard it? How do you discard it? So those are some of the issue. Now, the last one that I'm putting here is actually on biological warfare, and I think this is the last slide. Um, okay, so I didn't actually discuss that much on biological warfare apart from in the last slide in IP last week. So biological warfare is basically something that is dangerous to be done, but those involved in biology and of course scientists, rocket scientists and whatnot. So you could create something even without you knowing it by chance, without purpose and whatnot. So this could harness disease-causing capability of disease agents as weapons in a war. Anyone has ever heard of botulinum? So basically, it actually has been used as biological warfare. Okay, same with anthrax, which is quite common because anthrax is kind of like just like your normal powder, kind of like flour, okay, tepung. But it's actually very severe consequences. If you were to inhale it, then it will go through your lungs, it will destroy your lungs, and you would die, okay, within a day. So those kind of things. So it could also constitute to bioterrorism. So this is what people are worried about, okay, especially when you mutate certain bacteria and whatnot. So you may cause the bacteria to be virulent, and especially if it is a virus, you play around with the virus and it becomes something which is very dangerous. Have you ever? So this is actually something a bit different. Did you guys ever heard that from the coronaviruses, that there is a possibility, this is what they say, that it could actually be created from the lab. So a lot of labs, okay, there are a few labs in the world, one of it comes from China, one of it comes from the European countries, has verified that it doesn't come, or it is not man-made, it's actually nature occurring. So that, okay, is also could be done. Okay, you could create something, okay, just to destroy something. All right, which is by terrorism, you could kill a nation just like that. The next one is the use of certain natural agents in developing bioweapons, such as the anthrax or botulinum, right? And the last one is the misuse of biotechnology for these purposes. Biotechnology should be used to improve life, but if it is being used to create, again, biological warfare, to develop, again, bioweapons for bioterrorism, then it is not something that is good. So there is a misuse of biotechnology there. So I hope you guys basically look at some of this concern, some of these issues, because some of these issues, okay, there are ethical, moral, and also value basically factors involved. Some of them just only ethics, some of them just only on terms of moral value. So you need to differentiate, okay, between the ethics and also the moral in terms of this issue, because usually when I talk about ethical, it has something to do, okay, with the working attitude and also concerns among the nation, not only just the moral, right? So if you have further queries, okay, we will discuss it, okay, in the next hour at 12. All right, see you then.